My son-in-law stood in the doorway of what used to be my bedroom, arms crossed over his chest, and said, "Dad's here now. He needs the master suite. You'll be comfortable in the storage room." I looked past him at the boxes stacked along the hallway wall. Every single one had my name written on the side in black marker. I looked him dead in the eye and said, "That's the last decision you'll ever make in my house." He smiled, like I'd told a joke. 3 weeks later, he wasn't smiling anymore. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel, Father's Hushed Revenge, and drop a comment telling me what state you're watching from. Now let me tell you exactly how this happened. I came home on a Sunday evening in late October, 2 days earlier than planned. My brother had been recovering from knee surgery in Knoxville, and I'd driven down to stay with him for 2 weeks, help him get around, cook some meals, make sure he wasn't trying to climb stairs on his own, because Earl has never in his life listened to a doctor. The drive back to Nashville took just under 3 hours. I stopped once for gas and coffee outside of Cookeville, bought a bag of boiled peanuts from a roadside stand because it reminded me of something my wife used to love. She passed 4 years ago. I still buy them sometimes. My name is Frank. I'm 67 years old. I spent 32 years as a general contractor, built houses from the ground up all across Middle Tennessee. I know how structures work. I know which walls carry weight and which ones are just dividing space. That knowledge would become useful in ways I couldn't have predicted that Sunday evening. The house on Crestview Lane had been mine since 1991. I bought it when my daughter was 3 years old, when my wife and I were just starting to believe we might actually make something of this life. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a workshop in the backyard I built myself with leftover lumber from a job in Brentwood. I paid it off 9 years ago. Property tax, insurance, utilities. Every bill had one name on it. Mine. My son-in-law, Derek, had moved in with my daughter and their 2 boys 18 months earlier. He'd lost his job managing a restaurant chain when the company folded, and they were behind on rent at their apartment across town. My daughter called me on a Thursday night, voice tight with the effort of asking for something she knew I might say no to. "Just until we get back on our feet, Daddy. 6 months, maybe less." I said yes. That is what parents do. 18 months later, they were still there. Derek had found part-time work doing deliveries, which I never complained about, and my daughter was waitressing 4 nights a week. The boys, Caleb and Jalen, were 8 and 10. I loved having those kids in the house. We watched football together on Sunday afternoons. I taught Caleb how to use a level. Jalen could already name every tool in my workshop before his 9th birthday. I want to be clear about that. Those boys were the best part of the arrangement. The problems were quieter than that. Derek had a way of making himself comfortable in spaces that weren't his. He rearranged my kitchen because the layout wasn't efficient. He replaced the living room furniture with pieces his mother had given them before they moved in, putting my recliner in the garage because it didn't match. When I mentioned it, my daughter said Derek had strong opinions about the home environment. It was easier to let things go. I should have understood what that pattern meant. I pulled into the driveway at 7:43 on a Sunday evening. The porch light was off, which struck me as odd because my daughter knew I was coming home that night, just earlier than originally planned. I grabbed my bag from the truck bed and noticed something on the porch. A box, cardboard, sealed with tape, labeled in black marker Frank's bathroom things. I stood there on my own porch, staring at a box with my name on it. I picked it up and went inside. The hallway was lined with more boxes. Frank's clothes, Frank's files, Frank's personal items. My framed certificate from the Tennessee Contractors Board, the one I'd hung in the hallway for 20 years, was leaning against the baseboard with the glass facing the wall. My daughter's school photo, the one from her 4th grade year where she'd insisted on wearing a headband with a bow the size of a dinner plate, was wrapped in a plastic bag and sitting on top of a box near the coat closet. I set my bag down. I walked to the master bedroom. The door was closed. From behind it came the sound of a television, a baseball game, the volume high. I knocked twice and opened it. A woman I recognized was sitting up in my bed, shoes off, wearing a housecoat, with my television remote in her hand and a glass of sweet tea on my nightstand. It was Derek's mother, Brenda. I had met her 4 times before, Twice at family dinners, once at Caleb's birthday party, once in the grocery store, where she'd talked for 12 minutes about her sinuses. She looked at me with mild surprise. The way you look at an inconvenience you were warned about. "Oh, Frank," she said, "you're back early." I turned around and walked back down the hallway. Derek was in the kitchen, standing at my counter eating leftover chicken from a container. He saw my face and set the container down slowly. The way you set something down when you're deciding what kind of conversation this is going to be. "Dad needed a place," he said before I could speak. "She's got hip problems. She needed the ground floor, the private bath." It made sense. I looked at the boxes in the hallway. I looked at the certificate leaning against the baseboard. "Where's my daughter?" "She went to get the boys from her friend's house. She'll be back in an hour." "Who packed my things?" "I helped." "You packed up my belongings in my house without telling me." He leaned against my counter with a steadiness I found remarkable. "We left you the back room. It's got a window. You can set it up however you want." The back room was where I kept my filing cabinet, my drafting table, a pull-out sofa I'd bought years ago for when guests stayed over. It was not a bedroom. It did not have a private bath. It shared a thin wall with the laundry room. I want to explain something about that moment, because the comment I've heard most often when I tell this story is, "Why didn't you throw them out right then? Why didn't you call the police?" And the honest answer is this: she was my daughter's family. Caleb and Jalen were asleep somewhere in that house. In 32 years of building things, I had learned that the worst damage happens when you act before you understand the full structure of the problem. I needed to see all of it before I started taking anything apart. I told Derek I was sleeping in my truck that night and that we would speak tomorrow when my daughter was present. He looked at me like I was being dramatic. I took my bag back off the floor, grabbed the box with my bathroom things, and went to the truck. I sat in that parking lot of the Walgreens 2 miles away for 4 hours. I wasn't angry. I was calculating. I ran through numbers I hadn't thought about in years. Purchase price in 1991, $142,000. Final mortgage payment in 2015. Property value now, based on recent comps in the neighborhood, just under $410,000. Every utility bill in my name. Homeowner's insurance in my name. Property tax in my name. A document trail that stretched back 32 years, with one name on every page. Mine. I had allowed my daughter and her husband to live in my house rent-free for 18 months. I had never asked for a single dollar toward utilities or groceries. I had watched their boys in the evenings so my daughter could pick up extra shifts. I had lent Derek my truck when his was in the shop. 6 months ago, I had paid $1,200 out of my own pocket to fix the hot water heater because Derek said money was tight that month. I thought about that $1,200 for a long time sitting in that Walgreens parking lot. My daughter called at 9:45. Her voice had the careful, managed quality of someone who had been coached on what to say. "Daddy, I know this seems sudden, but Brenda really does have hip problems, and the stairs at her apartment were becoming dangerous. And we thought since you were gone, you thought since I was gone it would be easier to present it as decided." A pause. In the background, I heard Derek's voice, low and indistinct. She was on speaker. "We're just trying to do what's best for everyone. Come outside," I said. Alone. She didn't come alone. Derek stood behind her on the porch with his arms crossed in that way he had. The posture of a man who expects to win by making everything feel final. My daughter stood slightly in front of him, which told me everything I needed to know about the geometry of their marriage. I kept my voice completely level. I told her that I understood she was in a difficult position. I told her that I had no argument with her. Then I looked at Derek and told him that every box with my name on it would be back where it belonged within 24 hours, and that his mother would need to make other arrangements. He told me that the arrangement was already made, and that Brenda had nowhere else to go, and that as her father I should want to do right by my family. I told him his mother was not my family. He told me I was being cruel. I told him I would be speaking to a lawyer in the morning. My daughter said nothing. I drove back to the Walgreens parking lot and slept in the truck. I want to be honest about that night, because it matters. I am 67 years old. I have back problems. That truck seat was not made for sleeping. I woke up stiff and cold at 5 in the morning, watching the sky go from black to gray over the parking lot. And for about 20 minutes, I sat there wondering if Derek was right, if I was being cruel, if this was what being a good father looked like. Stepping back, making room, sacrificing my own comfort the way I had always done. Then I thought about my wife, about the house we had chosen together, the walls we had painted together, the kitchen she had redesigned 3 times because she could never quite get the layout right, about how she had died in the master bedroom of that house, in the bed that was now occupied by a woman I barely knew who thought I was an inconvenience. I drove to the Waffle House on Charlotte Pike and ordered coffee and eggs. I spread a paper napkin on the table and wrote down everything I owned. I wrote down what I knew about the law. Then I looked at my phone and started searching. The first lawyer I called had a long hold. The second had a voicemail that said they were not accepting new residential clients until January. The third was a firm downtown I'd heard advertised on the radio, and when the receptionist answered at 8:15 on a Monday morning, I told her I had a property matter that needed attention immediately. She asked if I could come in at 10. The office of Patterson Legal Group occupied the 4th floor of a building on Church Street. The waiting room smelled like wood polish and old carpet. A man, maybe 40 years old, came out to meet me, introduced himself as the associate I'd be seeing first. I told him I wanted to speak with a senior partner. He looked faintly put out. I waited. The senior partner was a woman named Helen Marsh. She walked into the conference room 20 minutes later without apologizing for making me wait, which I respected. She had reading glasses on a chain around her neck and the kind of posture that comes from spending decades in courtrooms. She sat down, opened a legal pad, uncapped a pen, and said, "What's the situation?" I told her the situation. I told her about the house, the mortgage, the payoff date, the name on every utility account. I told her about Derek and my daughter moving in 18 months ago. I told her about coming home to find my belongings in boxes and another woman in my bed. I told her about the back room and the posture Derek had used when he said the decision was made. She listened without interrupting. She took notes. When I finished, she looked up and said, "Do you have the deed with you?" I had it. I had stopped by the house before coming downtown, while Derek was out and my daughter was getting the boys ready for school. I had walked past my own boxes in my own hallway and gone into the back room where Derek had apparently already cleared space for what he imagined my new life would look like. The filing cabinet was there. I pulled the original deed, the mortgage satisfaction letter, every utility bill from the past 2 years, and my homeowner's insurance policy. I put them in a folder and drove downtown. Helen Marsh reviewed them for 4 minutes without speaking. "This is straightforward," she said. "You are the sole owner. They have no lease agreement, no rent history, no legal claim. Under Tennessee law, you can begin the eviction process immediately. Given that they've been there over a year, you'll need to provide proper written notice. After that, if they don't vacate, you go to court. How long does all of that take? If they leave after the notice, 30 to 60 days. If they contest it, add 4 to 6 weeks for a court date. And while we're waiting, I'm not sleeping in my truck." Helen set down her pen. Something in her expression shifted, still professional but with a directness I found reassuring. "Mr. Frank, you are the legal owner of that property. You have the right to occupy your home. If they physically prevent you from entering or occupying your own residence, that becomes a criminal matter, not just a civil one." She stood up, walked to the window, and looked out over the street. "I had a client 2 years ago," she said, without turning around. 71 years old, retired schoolteacher. Her nephew moved in to help after her husband died, slowly took over the finances, convinced her to sign paperwork she didn't fully understand. By the time she came to see me, he had nearly transferred the house into a trust with him as the primary beneficiary. She turned around. She got it back. It took 8 months and cost her more than it should have, but she got it back. A pause. These situations have a way of escalating if you wait. I thought about Derek's posture in the kitchen, about my daughter's voice on the phone, careful and managed. "Let's start today," I said. "Helen's associate. A young man named Marcus, with a very serious expression, was assigned to draft the eviction notice that afternoon. I was told it would be ready for signature by end of business Wednesday. I paid the retainer with my debit card, thanked Helen Marsh, and walked back out onto Church Street. I checked into a motel on Dickerson Pike that charged by the week and did not ask unnecessary questions. The room was clean enough. The parking lot needed work. I spread my documents on the desk, set up my laptop, and started creating what I'd always called on job sites a project file. Dates, amounts, everything that happened and when. In April 1991, I bought the house. In June 2015, I made the final mortgage payment. In March of the year before last, my daughter and her husband moved in temporarily. In October of this year, I drove home to find myself replaced. The timeline told a story. I was the only character who had ever invested anything in that property, financially or otherwise. On Tuesday, my daughter called 8 times. I answered the third call because I needed to hear what she was saying, not because I was prepared to negotiate. She told me Brenda was settled, that the boys were adjusting, that this arrangement made sense for the family. I asked her which family she meant. She said, "Daddy, please don't make this harder than it has to be." In the background, I could hear Derek's voice, low and directing, the way a prompter feeds lines to an actor who hasn't learned them yet. I told her my lawyer would be in touch. She went quiet. Derek called Wednesday morning from a number I didn't recognize. When I heard his voice, I understood why he'd used a different number. He thought I might not answer otherwise. He was right. "Merle, let's be reasonable." He had used my name twice since I'd known him, both times when he wanted something. "Frank," I said. "Frank, come on. You're really going to drag your grandkids through this? The boys will be fine. Children are more resilient than adults give them credit for. My mother has nowhere to go. That's a problem you created, not me. You'd really do this to your own daughter?" I sat on the edge of the motel bed and looked at the wall for a moment. "My daughter made a choice when she let you pack my belongings without telling me. I'm not doing anything to her. I'm protecting what's mine." He hung up. The eviction notice was served on Thursday morning by a process server Helen had used for years. He told me afterward that Derek answered the door in a bathrobe, took the envelope, read it, and told him it was a mistake. Then he said, "He doesn't have the nerve." The process server noted the exact time of service on his receipt, 11:42 a.m. By 2 o'clock, Derek had called Helen's office 4 times. She didn't return the calls. That was the protocol. All communication through the lawyer. That evening, my daughter posted something on Facebook. I saw it because my neighbor Sylvia, who had known me for 20 years and brought me tomatoes from her garden every August, sent me a screenshot with a message that just said, "Frank, I don't know what's going on, but I thought you should see this." My daughter had posted a photo of the boys sitting at the kitchen table doing homework, captioned with something about family needing to stick together in difficult times and not understanding why some people chose conflict over love. The comments were what you'd expect. Prayers and heart emojis, and a few people asking if she was okay. I looked at that photo for a while. Caleb was wearing the Tennessee Titans jersey I'd bought him for his birthday. There was a drawing on the refrigerator behind them that Jalen had made in art class, a dinosaur holding a football, which he'd given me on Father's Day. It was still hanging on my refrigerator. I put the phone face down on the desk. Helen called that night. "Ignore it," she said when I told her about the post. "This is standard. They're trying to make you feel like the aggressor. You are not the aggressor. You are the property owner exercising a legal right. The neighbors are going to think I'm throwing my grandchildren into the street. Some of them will think that regardless. The ones who know you won't." I thought about Sylvia sending me that screenshot. She hadn't added an accusation. She'd just said she thought I should see it. "There's one more thing," Helen said. Her tone had shifted slightly, the professional edge still present, but something underneath it. Careful, deliberate. "I reviewed the utility accounts today. The cable and internet Derek transferred them into his name last month, without your authorization. I sat very still. He transferred my accounts into his name. He called the provider, claimed he was the account holder making a name change. It's fraud, technically, but small enough that pursuing it separately isn't worth the effort. What it tells us is that this was planned. This wasn't an impulsive decision. He had been preparing. I thought about the kitchen rearrangement, the furniture swap, the $1,200 for the hot water heater, the careful patience of a man who was doing math I hadn't noticed he was doing. How long do you think he's been planning this? A pause. The cable transfer was 6 weeks ago. My guess is the idea started forming around the time you drove to Knoxville. I sat in that motel room for a long time after we hung up. Outside, a car alarm went off and then stopped. The ice machine at the end of the walkway cycled on. Normal Tuesday night sounds on Dickerson Pike. Ordinary and indifferent to the fact that someone had spent weeks planning to take my home while I was 3 hours away watching my brother learn to walk on a new knee. I had given Derek my truck when his was in the shop. The next morning I called the cable company and reported unauthorized account changes. I provided my original account number, my social security number, and the original date of service going back 17 years. The representative put me on hold for 11 minutes. When she came back, she confirmed the account had been restored to my name. I told her to suspend service to the address effective immediately. She said she could process that in 48 hours. I drove to the house that afternoon, not to go inside, just to see it. I sat across the street in my truck and looked at the place I'd owned for 32 years. The oak tree in the front yard that had been a sapling when I bought the property was taller than the roofline now. I had planted tomatoes along the fence every summer until my wife got too sick to enjoy them. The workshop in the back was built with my own hands on a Saturday in 1998. My daughter sitting on an overturned bucket watching me frame the walls, asking questions about every measurement. A curtain moved in the front window. Someone had seen me. I drove back to the motel. Derek left a voicemail that night. His tone had changed. The confidence was still there, but it was working harder than it used to. He said he'd spoken to a lawyer. He said I was creating housing instability for minors and that there were legal protections for children in residential disputes. He said things could get very complicated very quickly, and maybe we should sit down and talk before this went any further. I saved the voicemail and forwarded it to Helen. Her response came in a text at 9:47 p.m., which told me something about the kind of lawyer she was. The children are not in danger. They have a mother with income and a father with a truck. The protections he's referencing apply to situations of genuine homelessness, not strategic delays. Don't respond. I didn't respond. The cable went out on Friday. Derek texted me at 4 in the afternoon. Real mature, Frank. Real mature. The boys can't watch TV. I forwarded it to Helen without adding anything. On Saturday, Sylvia knocked on my motel room door. I don't know how she found the place and I didn't ask. She was 63 years old and had lived 3 houses down from me since 1999. She brought a container of beef stew and a slice of pound cake wrapped in foil. She sat in the chair by the window, and I sat on the edge of the bed, and she said, I don't know what all is going on over there, Frank, but those are not your grandkids' toys on my lawn. Those are movers' boxes. And I've seen that woman, the older one, out on your front porch like she owns the deed. She doesn't own the deed. Sylvia looked at me for a long moment. Good, she said. Don't let her act like she does. She left the stew and the cake and drove home. I ate dinner, sitting at the desk, looking at my project file. The legal ground was solid. I'd known that since the first meeting with Helen. What I hadn't fully understood until that moment was that I wasn't just fighting for the property. I was fighting for the version of myself that had built a life worth taking. The court date was set for late November. 4 weeks out. Derek had retained a lawyer, a man named Garrett Webb, who had a website with his photo on the homepage and a lot of testimonials about aggressive representation. He filed a counter-motion arguing that I had established a long-term residence arrangement with my daughter, that the abrupt termination of that arrangement constituted abandonment of parental duty, and that the presence of minor children created a protected housing interest. Helen read me the motion over the phone in a tone of voice that told me she had seen worse arguments succeed. We prepared. I spent 2 evenings at Helen's office going through documents, answering her questions, understanding what the hearing would look like. She was efficient and direct, and occasionally funny in a dry, quiet way that caught me off guard. She told me once, reviewing a stack of utility bills, that she'd handled a case the year before where the defendant had claimed squatters' rights after 9 months in a vacation cabin. She said the judge had not been amused. I asked how it had turned out. She said the squatter had left the same day the ruling was issued, taking the owner's outdoor furniture with him. I said that sounded about right. She looked up from the bills. "Does it bother you that we've never actually met in my office before? Every time it's been here in the conference room." I said I hadn't noticed. She said that was either very polite or very true. It was a small moment. Unremarkable, maybe. But I've thought about it since. The hearing was a Tuesday. I wore the suit I'd bought for my wife's funeral because it was the only one I owned. Helen wore a dark blazer and had her reading glasses on their chain and carried the kind of briefcase that says, "I have what I need." We were in the courtroom at 8:45. Derek and his lawyer were already there, along with my daughter, who sat in the gallery with her hands in her lap and did not look at me when I walked in. Brenda was not present. Garrett Webb made his opening argument about established residency and the welfare of minors and the cruelty of disrupting a household. The judge, a man in his 60s named Honorable David Carr, listened with the patience of someone who had heard this argument before and found it lacking the last time also. Helen presented the deed. She presented the mortgage satisfaction. She presented 32 years of utility payments from a single account. She presented the process server's documentation. She presented, with a particular quietness, the cable company's fraud report showing the unauthorized account transfer and the date it occurred. Derek's lawyer objected to the fraud report as prejudicial. Judge Carr said he'd allow it. Webb called Derek to testify. Derek explained the arrangement, the family understanding, the temporary nature that had evolved into something more permanent. He used the word partnership 3 times. Helen stood up for cross-examination and asked one question. "Mr. Thompson, in 18 months of living in Mr. Frank's home, how much rent did you pay?" Derek said there was no formal rent arrangement. "Yes or no, please. Did you pay rent?" "No." Helen sat down. I was called to testify. Helen asked me 3 questions. When did I buy the house? When did I pay it off? What did I find when I returned home in October? I answered all 3. When Webb cross-examined me, he asked whether I had verbally agreed to a permanent family living situation. I said no. He asked whether I understood that my daughter had emotional and financial dependence on the living arrangement. I said I understood that my daughter was an adult who had made choices, and that I had supported those choices for 18 months at my own expense. The courtroom was quiet for a moment after that. Judge Carr issued the ruling at 11:14 a.m. The property was mine. The residency arrangement had no legal standing. The defendants were directed to vacate within 14 days. Derek and his mother Brenda were assessed court costs of $4,200. The fraud complaint regarding the cable account was referred to the district attorney's office for review, a detail Garrett Webb had not apparently prepared for. Derek stood very still when the gavel came down. My daughter, in the gallery, pressed both hands over her mouth. Caleb and Jalen were not there. They were in school. Outside the courthouse on 2nd Avenue, Helen and I stood on the steps while she answered a call from her office. The November air was cold and direct. Pigeons walked along the edge of the fountain across the plaza with the unhurried confidence of animals who had never lost anything. She ended the call and looked at me. "You won," she said. "I know. Does it feel like it?" I thought about my daughter's hands pressed over her mouth. I thought about Caleb in the Titans jersey, about Jalen's dinosaur drawing on my refrigerator. "Parts of it," I said. Helen was quiet for a moment. Then she said, 3 years ago, my husband told me he wanted to sell the house we'd built together and move to Scottsdale because he'd decided retirement meant starting over. He had the paperwork already drafted. Didn't ask me, just presented it as decided. She looked out at the plaza. I'm still in the house. He's in Scottsdale. Some wins take a while to feel like wins. I looked at her. You didn't tell me that before. You didn't need it before. We walked to the parking garage together. At her car, she handed me a folder with copies of everything from the hearing. Our hands were occupied with papers and briefcases, and the ordinary friction of 2 people concluding something. She said she'd send the final billing statement when the case was fully closed. I said thank you, She said it was her job. I drove back to the motel on Dickerson Pike, made coffee in the room's small machine, and sat at the desk looking at the project file I'd built over the past 5 weeks. The house would be mine again in 14 days. On a Wednesday afternoon, I parked in the driveway and sat for a minute before going in. The oak tree was bare now, November having done its work. The workshop in the back was visible from the driveway, solid and square, lumber I had measured and cut and put together with my own hands 26 years ago. The house was empty. They had gone, all of them, leaving behind a silence that had texture and weight. I walked through every room. In the kitchen, the counters were clear. The furniture was all wrong. Still Derek's arrangement, but that was easily corrected. In the living room, the walls had nail holes where my daughter had hung things. In the master bedroom, my dresser was gone, presumably to wherever they'd rented. The bed frame was there. The mattress was there. I stood in the doorway looking at the space that had been my bedroom for 3 decades and thought about my wife and about the ordinary passage of time and about the way grief has a texture similar to walking into a room you know very well. In the dark, on the kitchen table, there was an envelope. My name on the outside, written in my daughter's handwriting. I sat down and opened it. Dad, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if it matters at this point. I want you to know that I knew it was wrong the whole time, not just when you came home, not just when the papers were served. I knew it the day Derek suggested it, and I didn't say anything because I was tired of being the person who said no to him. I let you be that person instead. That's not something I can explain well enough to make it make sense. I just want you to know, I knew. The boys ask about you every day. I tell them Grandpa loves them and is getting things sorted. I don't know what happens next, but I know what I did and I'm sorry. Your daughter, Angela. I folded the letter and put it in my shirt pocket. I spent the rest of that afternoon putting my house back together. I moved furniture. I rehung my certificates on the hallway wall. I found the box with my wife's things that I'd kept in the workshop and brought the framed photograph of her back into the bedroom where it belonged. I found Jalen's dinosaur drawing, still on the refrigerator, and left it there. At 5 o'clock, someone knocked on the front door. Helen was standing on my porch with a bottle of sparkling cider and a slightly uncertain expression, like she hadn't fully committed to the gesture and was prepared to explain it away if necessary. "The case is closed," she said. "I was going to send the final bill, but I thought a better use of time might be to deliver it in person. That's not a standard legal service. I'm choosing to make it one." I opened the door. She came in and looked around at the work I'd been doing all afternoon. The furniture shifted back. The photographs rehung. The rooms beginning to look like themselves again. She put the cider on the kitchen table and asked if I had glasses that weren't still in boxes. I found 2 in the cabinet over the stove. We sat at the kitchen table and I told her about the letter. I took it out of my pocket and read her the last few sentences. She listened without performing any particular emotion, which I appreciated. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment and then she said, "She'll come back. Not right away, but she'll come back. People who know they were wrong usually do, once the person who made them act wrong is out of the picture." You think Derek is out of the picture? I think a man who loses a court case and gets referred to the DA for fraud review is usually focused on his own problems for a while. I looked at the dinosaur drawing on the refrigerator. "I'd like to see the boys," I said. "When it's time, then you will." Outside, the November dark had come down fully over the yard, and the oak tree was a silhouette against the streetlights. The workshop was out there in the back, solid, the way I'd built it to be. The house was quiet around us in a way that felt like possibility rather than absence. Helen poured the cider. We touched glasses without making a toast, which was the right call. Some moments don't need words attached to them. They're just moments, and you're just in them, and that's sufficient. "You know," she said, looking around the kitchen, "this room has a good layout. My wife redesigned it 3 times before she got it right. She had good instincts." She did. Helen set down her glass and looked at me with the same directness she'd had across the conference room table the first morning I walked into her office. "I'm going to ask you something, and you don't have to answer it tonight." "All right. I'm not your lawyer anymore. The case is closed, which means I can ask if you'd like to have dinner sometime. An actual dinner, not a meeting. I looked at her for a moment. 67 years old, sitting in my own kitchen, in the house I had built a life in, with everything in its right place around me for the first time in months. Yes, I said. I would like that. She nodded. Once. The way she nodded when a legal point was settled and we could move on. I found that I liked that about her. She didn't turn things into more than they were or less than they were. She understood how structures worked. Load-bearing walls and the ones that just divide space. Sometime I may call my daughter. When the right amount of time has passed. When Derek is further in the rear view, and Angela is finding out who she is when no one is prompting her from behind the scenes, I'll wait until Caleb and Jalen are old enough to ask for me on their own, which won't be long. Those boys know where I live. I have what I need right here. I have the house I paid for. I have a workshop in the backyard where I know the location of every tool. I have an oak tree that was a sapling when I was a younger man and is now taller than the roof. I have a letter from my daughter that I'm going to keep in a drawer until the day comes when she needs to know I kept it. And tonight, I have someone sitting across from me at my own kitchen table who looks at me like I'm worth the trouble. That's enough. For right now, that's more than enough. If this story meant something to you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment and tell me what state you're watching from. I read every single one. Click the video on your left to hear the next story. Thank you for being here.